spend much time off campus, or is a lot of it spent sort of in that
I
area?
so I have one friend who doesn't spend a day not on campus. Like, sorry, doesn't spend a day where she doesn't go off campus at least like once.
Yep.
But then a lot of people, like, there's so much to do around the campus that like you can, and like you kind of forget that you haven't really left the same few
Yeah.
streets. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I remember really enjoying walking around sort of the streets right around there, and some really nice little cafes and places to get
Hmm.
coffee. And
Yeah.
yeah, it
It
was,
feels like it feels like it's like a little outside of the city, like the part inside of it, like the main campus area. It doesn't feel like
yeah,
you're really in the city. And then you go out and you're in the city again. It's like really nice.
yeah,
But
that is true. It feels like very neighborhoodish and
hmm,
very accessible in many ways. And so, yeah, so
hmm,
that's really great. Yeah.
yeah,
Now, are we streaming already? It looks like,
it looks like we
Yeah,
are.
I just got
Yeah.
it. I was working on that. I had to
Okay.
make some phone calls and to figure out how to get that going, but
Okay.
it should be live now.
Cool.
all right.
How you doing, Mr. Ito?
I'm doing well. How are you? Can you remind me your name again? I'm sorry.
Alex. Yeah,
Alex. Oh, Alex. Yes, of course. How's your family doing?
we're good. We're just at home right now, but we're all healthy and everything, so that's good.
Good, good. Is your mom still, is she remote teaching then right now, or is she?
Yeah, they're getting ready to go back. I guess they're planning to be on campus for part at least like hybrid. So I don't know how much she'll be actually in person, but she's planning.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's many of us, it feels like shifting winds right now, right? In terms of, what we're going to be doing, and we're all up in the air a little bit. So, yeah. So,
I'm gonna turn my video off because I'm just the tech guy today. But good to see you.
Alex, it was good to see you.
Good to see you.
Julie, have your sessions been going well?
These, yeah, we had the last one, we had professors from a bunch of universities like Boston University, Northwestern and stuff. And that was like a really cool discussion. Like they said so much like really like amazing stuff that I had like been thinking about but didn't really know how to put it into words, and it was just like really cool. But yeah, so they've been going pretty well. I think that one was definitely my favorite.
Oh, good, good. It's nice when you're able to, I think, use this medium and really bring in people from different locations, which you normally maybe wouldn't do if, we were trying to run them all in person. So,
Yeah, exactly. Because we had someone all the way in Chicago and then like a bunch of people in Massachusetts, and it was really cool. It was really
yeah.
cool.
And great for the panelists too, as well, I think, in terms of sharing that information. It's really a nice opportunity for them to get together as well. So,
Yeah, it was really cool.
great.
Jasmine.
Hi, guys.
Hi. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good, good.
I don't believe we met before.
I'm the principal at the middle school.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I think I may have seen you speak in a meeting once, though. Would that be right? Did you speak at some meetings at the high school?
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there was one, I believe, last year, like the ending of last year. And
Yeah.
it was all the principals and like assistant principals and whatnot.
Yes, I think I may have been in the audience.
Okay.
Yeah, admiring your work, of course.
Oh, my light in the. Oh, okay. Let me see if I can.
Alex, one thing, this is good for now, but when you get rid of the sharing the screen, if you can make sure that like it's like it shows all the faces at once instead of like the spotlight.
I'm working
for
on how to
speaking.
do that
Okay,
right
cool.
now.
Cool.
Do you know how to do that?
No. Sorry.
Liliana just said it. Okay.
Oh, Julia, how did you do the background thing? Because my back,
Uh,
there's like a little light shining through.
oh, huh. Um, I went I went to this like HD backgrounds website and then I downloaded it and then I
Oh,
just put it in. If you go to virtual background underneath chat, you can add it right next to choose virtual background. But I don't know if I'm gonna keep this up because it's a little weird.
it's probably too late for me.
Yeah, this is my actual background. I don't know. Grid mode. Did it work, Alex?
I got to do that once the screen sharing is over. So once
Oh, okay. But you know how to do it now?
Yep.
Cool.
Oh, so we're live, right?
Yep.
That's awesome.
Hi, Michelle and Miss Khan.
Oh, hi, Miss Khan. Hi, Michelle. I just spoke to Michelle, so.
Oh, oh, cool.
Hey, Julia.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. It's good to see you.
Me too.
Hey, Dr. Chisholm.
Hey, Jim. How are you?
Good.
Good. Good of you to come. Hey, Alex Stoddard, if you're back there,
Hey, I'm here. I'm just doing some technical stuff right now.
thank you for that. We appreciate it. Hi, Yasmin. I'm flipping through.
Hi.
Hi, Senior Cup winner.
How are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Is tech all good? Just wondering.
We're just working on getting a few people in here who need the
Okay. Okay, dope.
The person, this might just be my computer, but there's a second Joan. And you can like rename yourself, or we can have Alex rename you.
Yeah, that second Joan doesn't look like a Joan to me.
No.
Jeff,
Looks like a
you're
Jeff.
Joan.
She's finally done it.
Jeff,
She's cloned
awesome.
herself.
Jeff, that is
Yeah,
so
right, exactly.
cool.
She's done it. Yes.
Gosh,
Two places at the same time.
Jeff and I've morphed. I love it.
Sonny and Cher back together.
There you go, right.
Ooh.
Wow.
I'll start singing.
Good one, David.
Stop that singing.
Just you and me, babe.
You know what? It's because I just shared the link with Jeff for the webinar. So that's how I think we got our
Okay.
Right.
names crossed.
What you're not supposed to do. It's in the rules. You're supposed to
Sorry.
I'm
only
sorry.
I-
Sorry.
the Zoom rules.
Sorry, I meant to send that to Alex. Cool. I
I'm really
think everyone's
comfortable with
here.
Jeff sharing my name with me. I feel like a sense of solidarity and
Oh, it's a good thing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. He's a good guy.
We could blame it on Joan and no one know who it is.
please blame
Yeah,
it.
right.
I'll take it. I'm good.
Nope, there's Raldo.
Buenas noches.
Hey.
Hey, Roberto.
It's always sunny at Schofield.
Been a lot of days there.
Yeah,
Sun never sets.
that's right.
Okay, I think that is everyone. So let's get started. Yasmin, you want to go ahead? You're muted, Yasmin.
Sorry, not comfortable with Zoom yet. Okay, so welcome everyone to Wake Up Wellesley's fourth live stream discussion. My name is Yasmin Jaffier, and Julia Jordo Henry and I will be co-facilitating this evening. The head organizers of this event, Liliana and Kayla, have worked tirelessly to make this opportunity possible, and we are so thankful to them and all the co-organizers that will be helping out here tonight in the comments. This is our fourth and final live stream, so be sure to check out the last three, which were all recorded and can be found on this YouTube's page.
We want to thank all the panelists for taking the time to participate in this conversation with us. We're excited to engage in this important and pertinent discussion with you all. We invited each of you tonight because we want to hear Wellesley Public School administrators' thoughts and opinions on these topics. You will notice we consciously did not invite Dr. Curry, the Director of Diversity and Inclusion. because we want to encourage the decentralization of anti-racism work, and we want to hear the work each of you are doing individually in your administration roles. We also want to demystify your roles as administrators to the community by discussing your responsibilities. And we have spoken at length to Dr. Curry about these topics already, so it is our hope that you'll answer these questions with that in mind. Our panelists tonight are administrators in the Wellesley Public Schools, and before we begin, we ask that each panelist introduce themselves and their role in WPS.
I'm happy to start. Good evening. I'm David Lucier, Superintendent of Schools.
I'm Jim Roberti. I'm a member of the school committee.
I'm Mark Ito. I'm the principal at Wellesley Middle School.
I'm Jamie Chisholm. I'm the principal at Wellesley High School.
Jeff Dees, the principal at Upham.
Gerardo Martinez, principal at Schofield.
I'm Joan Dabrowski. I'm the assistant superintendent for teaching and learning.
And I'm Linda Chow, chair of school committee.
Great. Thank you. And we are honored to host you here and so grateful you are willing to engage in this discussion. If any audience members have any comments or questions, you can use the chat where our co-organizers will be responding to the best of their ability. Thanks. And so with that, we'll get started. And the first question is, this is for all the participants as well, and anyone who wants to share. What's on your anti-racist list? What are you reading and watching? Any webinars you're attending? Any great books or resources you've found?
So I'm reading Stamped by Ibram Kendi. I like it a lot. It is, as he says, not a history book, but it is a book with history in it. So anyway, and a lot of history about understanding racism and where it is today, because it's not in our history, it is in our present, which is one of the themes of the text, which I really like. And just today, Mr. Ito actually turned me on to a podcast, and I listened to the first one this afternoon called Nice White Parents, run by the New York Times. I highly recommend that. I got kind of jazzed listening to that first episode today. So anyway.
So I'll jump in and say,
oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
Joan, did you want to go, or do you?
Well, I'm going to build on the Ibram X. Kendi, because I was able to listen to a couple of podcasts and actually attend a webinar that since he's coming to BU. My daughter is a rising sophomore at BU, so I've been following his work closely, how to be anti-racist. So that has been definitely on the top of my list. Also, the other piece that I would recommend, or the text I'd recommend, is sort of checking in on white supremacy, Leila Assad's book that has been sort of a prominent read for me this summer, and looking at her work. And again, the other author that I've been reading is Matthew Kay. He actually works with educators. He's a high school teacher. He wrote a book called Not Light But Fire about the power of conversations, particularly in high school classrooms, but I think actually it resonates for me with adult conversations about issues of race and opening up for really important discourse.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, Jamie had mentioned Nice White Parents, and so I am actually listening to that. I've listened to 2, and I can't wait to listen to the 3rd a little later tonight. So I'm anxious to get on that. I did in the early summer I went back, a few years, and I picked up Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. So in thinking about sort of in the context in which we live now, and sort of what it means to sort of interpret, strangers, and sort of how do we interact with them. And then too, this summer I have been trying to think a little bit about just the stories and the conversations that people are having. And so I took a little break from all the, the work in pedagogy and sort of the work in anti-racist stuff having to do with education. And I listened to the Michelle Obama podcast and also the Trevor Noah. He also has a book too that I went to and listened to. So all good stories and all good conversations that are happening.
So this is Jim Roberti. I just bought, and I'm going to start White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. A couple of my friends have read it and recommended that would be a good one to start with. And I think she's a local. Is she local? I think she is. Is she from Massachusetts? So That's one of the ones I bought, and I bought another one called Between the World and Me, which I think a lot of people have read already too. So that's what I'm going to do for the next couple of weeks.
I'll jump in because my kids are constantly demanding my attention. I have to have numerous books in numerous parts of the house. So I'm actually in 5 books right now, and well into them. The first one is Chasing Social Justice, which I keep in the kitchen. Between the World and Me, which I have in my study where I typically do my Zoom meetings. How to Be an Anti-Racist is in the basement. Deculturalization and the Struggle for Equality is all over the place because it's one of my favorites. And My Grandmother's Hands, a spectacular book. I've watched a YouTube video of a 1965, I believe, debate between James Baldwin and William Buckley, which took place in London, I think at Cambridge University. It's a spectacular debate. And the focus of the debate is the American dream, whether it is achieved at the expense of the American Negro. I've watched it twice, and I cannot believe how relevant it is. 1965, 2020, and Jeff is saying me too.
Yeah, so I'll go next. A couple of my boys at home, they had to read the autobiography of Malcolm X, so we wanted to reread it again. So we're reading that. I think that's the 3rd or 4th time I've been through it. And then I also really interested in James Baldwin, and there's also another one out in reference to what Gerardo was saying. It's something that was written that was done here lately. I'm Not Your Negro, and I think that's really pertinent to what's happening now. So those are really powerful messages that I think needs to be listened to and talked about. I really like what James brought to the table, and I think it's important for us to be reading those. So those are some of the things I've been involved with.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I don't know who it was that said, but I also just finished reading Michelle Obama's autobiography, which is really extraordinary. My kids kept asking me, how's it going? And I said, I'm still becoming Michelle. I haven't quite finished yet, but it was really amazing, her life. And, particularly from an education perspective, some of the forks in the road that she was confronted with in her family, particularly around education, I think really made me think about how we consider opportunities and how families often have to make difficult choices in thinking about what's the right path forward with so much uncertainty. One book actually I have right here on my desk. I've gone through it a couple of times. He's one of my favorite authors and speakers is Chris Emdin from Columbia, who has a great book for white folks who teach in the hood and the rest of y'all too, Reality, Pedagogy, and Urban Education. And Dr. Emdin does such a great job, I think, of challenging us to think about assumptions we make, particularly in a pedagogical context of working with students of color, and how sometimes we translate our privilege in ways that are not appropriate. Anyway, every time I read it, I feel like I'm challenged in different ways. So I wanted to highlight Professor Emdin as one of many authors who's been already discussed.
Awesome. Thank you all for answering. So the next question is for all the school principals. Although they are small in number, the teachers of color in WPS are extremely important individuals in our school communities. What steps are you considering taking to retain and support your teachers of color and make sure their experiences are being heard?
I think one of the most important steps we started to take very deliberately last year, and we did it a couple of different times, was to differentiate our professional development and allow for affinity professional development. Just sort of recognizing, this is a learning for me last year, was to recognize that it's traumatic for our teachers of color to have to listen to white colleagues say things that, they're just coming to understand. So, for them to have to go through some things that are basic and they don't need to learn, at different times is not helpful for their growth. And where were we feeding our teachers of color? So trying to deliberately differentiate our professional development so that our professionals of color could have affinity groups and could have affinity professional development that met specific needs, I think was a good step forward in that way.
Something that we do at the middle school too, and this is really maybe more for the administrators of color that sit on, the leadership team at the middle school, but, we always open every meeting with conversations about race. And so it gives an opportunity, I think, for us to predict that every meeting that we all sit together, and there's about 15 to 16 of us, that is going to be the first conversation that we have. And I think it gives us the ability to feel, I think, like we can talk about things either personally, or we could talk about something that's happening with students, or we could talk about something that's happening just, in the community or in the greater world. And so I think it opens up space for that to happen. And I think what's been really nice is that I've heard that some of the department heads have taken that sort of practice back into their departments, and that they do that for their teachers too as well. So that's something that we do, along with some of the things that Jamie said too as well.
I have a follow-up question for you two. How are you making sure that you aren't burning out your teachers of color? Because just existing as a minority in a PWI, predominantly white institution, is a burden upon itself.
I'm happy to add to what my colleagues have said. A very important mission of the district for the past many, many years has been maintaining diversity and anti-racism on our agenda. Each year we send groups of teachers to the MEDCO conference, the Rectors Conference, with a focus on bringing back key learning to share with the staff. And so part of the support for our teachers of color is that we all collectively own the learning, and that we're not looking to any individual to sort of represent an entire race in sharing their stories. While I'm a very private person, I find that one of the things that helps in this work is to deprivatize some of my early experiences as a Latino growing up in the Bronx and having lived through the trauma of poverty and all that comes with that. So I make myself vulnerable as a way to represent and support similar students within our community. And by doing so, I think we make it easier for people to have much more challenging, difficult conversations about race.
I think it's also important to make sure that the conversations about race are often led not by our teachers of color, but by our white advocates and our white allies. And that it can come from leadership, it can come from formal leaders like principals, but it can also come from teacher leaders. I feel very proud of the teachers at the high school who are very passionate about this work. There's a number of teachers, they tend to nest in social studies and English, but it's not exclusive to those two departments. There are social justice warriors who exist in other departments, and to lift them up, to empower them, to give them opportunities is one of the ways that we can sort of spread that out, and so that the conversation doesn't always feel like it has to be led by our, as you say, this small number of teachers of color.
Do you all have any plans for future building, like what you would do in the future?
Yeah, we have an opportunity at the high school that I'm excited about to work with a leader that the administrative team actually had the pleasure of doing a workshop with, Dr. Paul Gorski, who runs the Equity Literacy Project. And so I have the opportunity I'm working with my PTSO to see if we can get 20 or more teachers to be trained as equity literacy facilitators, so that they can learn specifically how to best facilitate these conversations. It was actually something brought to me organically by some of the teachers who saw, sorry, an ad for the offer for this workshop. And when I brought it to my PTSO to see if we could pay for it for them, the PTSO was super excited about it. And they actually reached out directly to Dr. Gorski. And so we're working on trying to bring something back to the school specifically so that he's just using our context. So we're kind of negotiating how much that's going to be. And but I've got a minimum of 20 teachers who are interested in that work right now. So the hope is that to build on some models of peer-to-peer professional development work that Dr. Ito and I have been doing for the last year and a half. So together with middle and high school staff, we did a big project this year that we weren't able to finish because of the COVID closure. But we want to continue that sort of peer-to-peer work. We feel like it's the most powerful stuff. So we do have that opportunity on the book. So I'm excited for that in the future, and it should be sort of the near future for us. So,
where did you said a workshop? Where did you hear about the workshop from? Sorry.
So Mrs. Giddings, who you know, brought it to my attention. It's the Equity Literacy Institute's Racial Equity Facilitator Training. So the Equity Literacy Institute is run by Dr. Gorski. Like I said, he's somebody who came to meet with our admin team this summer. So all the principals and central office staff did a training with Dr. Gorski this summer. So, as soon as she brought it to me, I was like, wow, I just did a workshop with him. He's phenomenal. I was really excited to support that. So in partnership with the PTSO, we're pursuing it.
Can I add just a little bit? There's a different venue here that can be looked at too, as opposed to the traditional, there's an opening in the classroom and let's fill it through all the different people that have applied to it. Especially at Upham, we house the kids who have autism. And so we have 20 paraprofessionals. And at any one point through the year, we're training those people. And they're either being placed in a teacher's position because they're training them. They might be placed in a teacher position that comes open in the Wellesley system or go and have gone other places. But my point in this is it's another venue, another way or an avenue for us when we've hired different people of color and different ethnicities, and we have a really good variety of those paraprofessionals in that venue. And so now when a position comes open, and I believe Gerardo and I were speaking about when he had an opening early on, and so I passed on someone to him. So that's a different venue and a different avenue that we have at our discretion as well.
I want to add just a little bit to what Dr. Chisholm was talking about bringing the middle school and the high school together. And I think it was really powerful. Unfortunately, we were interrupted by the pandemic, but before that, we were able to bring staff together in a way that I think sort of really expanded, I think, were the challenges and the experiences that our schools were having from grade 6 through 12. And I think what was really, and something I want to, pick up on after we return is around this notion that, there's a lot of things that are happening in pockets within our schools. And the idea would be that we bring those pockets together and we allow we find ways to have forums that allow for those conversations to happen so that it doesn't feel like there's just these small individual things that are happening, but we can get more momentum from more people sort of gathering together. So I'm excited about that work coming up too.
Great, so we're gonna go on to the next question, and it's for Dr. Lucier and school committee members. What are some significant steps that have been taken to research the hiring process and try to have as many applicants of color as possible?
Yeah, thanks, Yasmin. And by the way, congratulations on the Senior Cup. I watched it remotely, which I thought was great. That's excellent. So it's a really important question. And, there's a lot of research, I'm sure many of our viewers are aware of the importance of students seeing teachers who resemble themselves in their career going through school. And even one or two teachers makes an extraordinary difference. So we've been working at this problem or this challenge for some time in terms of trying to increase the diversity of our teaching force. So just a few data points to start. So if you think that our student body is just over 70% white, if you just look at our teachers, we're about 93% white. So, even in a community that doesn't have a lot of racial diversity in terms of its student body, compared to some districts, our teaching force is even less diverse than that. So one of the goals we actually established in our original strategic plan from some years ago is that each year our aspirational target is that 20% of our new hires would be individuals of color. Some years we've gotten a little bit closer to that. Other years we've been pretty far away. Taken together, I would say our efforts have not yielded the sort of traction that we had hoped for. Additional steps we've taken are occurring on multiple fronts. Gail McCracken, our HR director, isn't here, but I think she'd be the first to say that she's plugged into a number of very specific diversity networks that have very specific job fairs that advertise in publications connected to various affinity groups. We've been attending those now for some time. Much of our processing of candidates occurs in an online platform, and we provided training each year to our administrators on being able to filter those applicant pools based on a number of demographics to help ensure that people are really thinking about those attributes and how that can help us. That's something that occurs each year. We've also, starting last year, actually been issuing after action reports to let administrators know how they've been doing in terms of who's been interviewed. Interviewing for teachers and hiring typically takes place within the school level, right? It's not done at the district level. And so it's critical for department heads and teachers who are involved in those processes to really be thinking about what that looks like. Something that's relatively new is that the diversity of our teaching assistants tends to be much higher than our current teaching pool. And so this past year, for example, through a grant that we were awarded, we're supporting teaching assistants to go for their teaching certification and to pass the MTEL exam, which is one of the requirements to become certified in Massachusetts. So again, another strand of trying to grow from within. I think at the end of the day, something that really has to happen is a much closer collaboration and partnership with higher education, where teachers are actually receiving their training. And that means going much further upstream, thinking about who does their student teaching within the Wellesley Public Schools, connecting with those college and university deans and their schools of education on what their pools look like in any particular year, and creating close collaborations. I would say if we're simply waiting to go to job fairs and think about who applies, I think we're learning that's too far after the fact to be effective. And so, I think it's going to take a belts and suspenders kinds of approach where we're doing all of those things and we're proactively working up front with teacher education programs and helping to actually grow our own teachers through their work with us. So, I think it's going to take a comprehensive strategy. I can tell you, both at a district level, and I know Jamie particularly has been involved in some of these conversations more regionally. This is something that many of the Metro West communities have remained committed to and have been trying to work together in partnership to figure out how collaboratively we can increase the diversity in our region by not just thinking about these issues individually as districts, but actually thinking about districts pooling together their resources and communication to try to increase everyone's diversity together. So, we remain in those regional conversations as well.
The other thing we can do, sorry, Yaz.
Go for
I just
it.
want to
Go
add
for it.
one thing. It's important because I think we also want to do some recruiting of our alums. Maybe people who go to prestigious schools in New York, or people who won the senior cup. If they want to become teachers and come back, it would be awesome if we could grow our own and bring some folks back to our Wellesley Public Schools. Just saying.
That's funny.
I'd like to add from the school committee perspective that we're actually not responsible for any hiring other than actually the superintendent. So our focus as a committee really is on helping to develop and manage the policies for really the district at the district level. We also have responsibilities around resources from the standpoint of approving the budget, the annual budget for the schools, and sort of shepherding the budget through the process to get approval at the annual town meeting. And we also have a focus on facilities. So what we can do as a committee to help to make Wellesley more attractive to teachers of color. I should probably mention that Jim and I were both involved in the interviewing process, at least for candidates for the director of DE&I. So that, of course, is an important role that we also tremendously, we supported as part of the budget. This was the FY20 budget, and we helped to interview candidates. And I would say Charmy's or Dr. Curry's role is very important when it comes to helping with the hiring process and the recruiting process for educators of color. The other thing that we did do, and of course it's very recent, we actually just last Thursday as a committee adopted an anti-racism resolution. And this is something in which we have resolved as a district to continuously practice anti-racist practices and really ideally try to eradicate anti-racism. So that's something we felt is important to come out and state and ideally help to make and create a culture that's anti-racist. And I don't know, Jim, if you wanted to add anything.
Sure. I think that, I'm sure you haven't thought about budgets, but, they're always a give and a take and a pull and a push. And I was a new member last year to the committee, and I was very impressed with how we stuck to our guns, and we actually got the town and the community to support the inclusion of Dr. Curry's position, because adding new positions to budgets is not always popular in Wellesley or any town. And we thought this was a critical position, and we got it done. And the second thing I think that school committee people can do that Linda hasn't mentioned is just model behavior sort of to the community, and show that we're anti-racist and that we're involved and we want to make things better and hire a more diverse faculty in modeling that behavior and dealing directly with people who may not agree with us, and support what the administration is doing is the best thing I think we can do, other than help with money and policy.
Thank you.
I know this is. Oh,
sorry, Yasmin.
Sorry, Julia. I just want to ask this real quick question. I know this has been talked about before, but I think a specific piece of this that I know one of our assistant principals have mentioned before is like, what are you guys going to do to make Wellesley more attractive to candidates of color?
Well, I think it's a great question. It's a really big question. I think Wellesley isn't necessarily the community that candidates of color are intuitively thinking about where they're going to find affinity support within the school or community that reflects perhaps the diversity they have in mind. That doesn't mean we can't do some things about that. It just means that hill might be a little bit steeper to climb than other places. I think it begins with what our induction program looks like. When candidates interview, what's the experience that they have? If they are in fact hired, we have a pretty robust mentoring program for teachers, and we've actually been working to align that even further around racial affinity to provide additional support. Being a new teacher is hard anywhere, period. But we can imagine how many additional layers of complexity there are if you're coming in to a majority white community, right? So we want to make sure that there's not just the sort of standard induction support we have for all new teachers coming in, but even additional layers for those candidates of color. I think reputation is something that takes a while to build, and yet it can be so easily lost. And, there's no question when we have some high profile incidents, such as some of the things we've seen in the last few years, that always makes that job harder, even when it feels like we're making progress. If folks feel like this is going to be a challenging community, or the culture here is not going to be supportive, it's going to take time for us to not only work on those things, but for that word to spread about the kinds of support and the welcoming environment where candidates of color can not only come, but thrive and be successful.
You know, the other thing I'd add is that I've been involved in this off and on for 25 years, and what I've noticed, you guys will probably laugh when I say this, is that teachers, administrators sort of like working with friends that they've worked with other places, or there's always been an affinity to people who have worked together before to work together again. And so my hope has always been in creating more diversity here in the teachers, is that we get a core group of people who want to be here in the beginning, and then they kind of can bring in other people that they want to work with. And that's sort of way to, I think, to grow a community here. It's going to take some time, but we have, hopefully with Dr. Curry here, we can start to build on a pattern of growth, and hopefully within the next 2 or 3 years expand what we have already.
I also
Definitely agree with that. Sorry, if you want to speak.
Sorry, I was just going to add, I've been reading the chat. So Roxanne Scott, one of our amazing elementary librarians from Honeywell, has weighed in. And I think, you know, as I've read her comment in the chat, it reminds me of when we are hiring, how we are looking to grow and find ways to support and mentor our educators. And Roxanne tells the story of starting her career in New Jersey and having an administrator who invested his sort of support around Roxanne's development and growth. And I think Roxanne tells the story of us needing to do that for our teachers of color here in Wellesley, and knowing that they'll come here, be supported, and we will invest in their growth. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. That's all.
I just wanted to add to the importance of the interview process itself, you know, in terms of a first introduction to the district. And I do feel like, you know, who we have on the hiring committees and the questions that we're asking and the experience that they're having, you know, in that process, I think is a really important way of showing, you know, teachers that we're a safe space and this is what we value, you know. So anyway.
And I'll also add that as part of our admin training with Poor Gorski this summer, and in our work with Sharmi this year, the types of questions that we're asking certainly get a lot deeper into what it means to be an anti-racist educator. And, you know, Paul, Dr. Gorski talked about the power of bringing the right people on board. And I've had interviews the last couple of days for teaching assistant positions. And I've asked this question, you know, where in school might someone find racism? And it is an exceedingly difficult question to answer, but candidates that can answer truthfully are the people that we want to be bringing on board and nurturing. I was surprised at how many people couldn't answer that question and resorted to you know, answers that focused on multiculturalism and basic representation of cultures, as opposed to the reality of being hypervigilant around some kids as a form of racism. So we're changing the types of questions and digging deeper and prying deeper into this topic, which is so important to us as a community.
Thank you. So you guys have talked a little bit about this. This is to the principals. So we want to know what steps can Wellesley take, such as hiring more experienced staff, reorganizing administrative processes, or educating all faculty so that the burden doesn't fall to the few teachers of colors to provide advice on how to handle racist incidents. How can we create an environment where everyone feels equipped to handle these incidents?
I think so much of this work goes back to our goals as a community. When I mentioned the 5 books that I've been reading, the part I didn't mention is that really what I'm doing is looking for the right texts and reading material to engage the staff in a year-long, multi-year, right? So it's not a one-time deal, right? Where essentially over the course of multiple years, we're providing the equivalent of a master's level course in anti-racism, so that we're learning together. So I'm excited about engaging my staff and community in a common read and to dig deep. And I think that's one of the ways that, at least at my school, and I know that the principals are having this discussion, elementary principals, leading these discussions.
I think more education too about ally behavior, in terms of, I do understand, how it feels to feel sometimes like you have to speak for an entire group of people and how burdensome that can feel. And I do appreciate, I think, when other people step up and are able to help in that. And so, but I think there's some education that goes with that in terms of people feeling like they can. And I think we need to continue to sort of encourage that to happen and to support that, when it happens.
And Dr. Ito, when people make mistakes, we have to create an environment where we know that in the effort of attending to an egregious event or issue in a particular school, that we may make mistakes, and we have to learn from those mistakes, because often what happens is we create a culture of silence because no one wants to offend someone, or we have to free people from that fear.
I just think it has to be everybody's job, and there can't really be any wiggle room in that. It can't be that someone says, well, I don't want to pick on any discipline, but I'm an English teacher, so I'll say I'm an English teacher. I teach English, and I don't teach about race. Well, no, everybody teaches about race, and everybody has to attend to what issues come up in the school and what our students in front of us experiences are. And we have to be real about that, because we teach kids before we teach content. And there's no way around that. That's the way it has to be. And we can't let people get away with that.
Yeah, I want to build on that point as well, Jamie, because I feel like this maybe is the place where we have the greatest gap. So, we've had no shortage of speakers. We've offered professional development. We've had folks think about, their own experiences with race. And yet, at the end of the day, I think what's most critical is a teacher's ability to translate that in all of those small moments in the classroom that define their pedagogy, right? And I think for many of our teachers, the gap is, gosh, I want to be an ally. I want to be supportive, but what does this mean for how I teach math, right? Or how I teach reading, or all the little things I do? What are the teacher moves around being an anti-racist that allows me to embed that within my practice? That's the level of detailed knowledge that I think is going to be most visible to students. It's also, for example, one of the reasons last year we wanted to connect some of the students involved with our Young Ethnic Scholars with our brand new teachers. And for them to hear, these are the things that teachers do for me that make me feel supported and successful. I mean, that level of practical conversation and exchange, I think, giving teachers a keen sense of what are the very specific things that they can do in the classroom, I think that may be among the most important things we can do to affect our practice and student experiences.
Dr. Chisholm, you talked about how it's, and I think Dr. Lucier too, talked about how it's everyone's job. And I was just wondering, how could you hold teachers accountable when they're not doing that, when they aren't thinking it's their job? Is there an evaluation system you could use, or you use, or something like that?
Yeah, certainly there's a formal tool in evaluation. It's part of the teacher rubric that about cultural proficiency, but so that there's a formal way we can attack an observation we make or a report that a student brings to us that we can verify. But it's also through, just having a hard conversation and doing supervision. So there's the evaluation process, which is really formal. And, that's what sort of we say determines, where you are on the scale of, excellent or proficient or needs improvement, right? On those ratings marks. But then there's also just really good direct conversation with back to that's not okay. You can't not address that when that happens in front of you. And so we have to do both. You can't do part of it. Because if the teacher doesn't understand, or if we're not helping them to be able to do that work, then that's the system failing the teacher too. So that's on us. We've got to supervise them about to do that. So I think we use both those tools in congruence. That's why people always say supervision and evaluation. It's both pieces that we have to do. So, and it can't just be, reactionary. We have to be proactive, but certainly when a moment comes up, that's what we have to do.
Yeah, Julie, I would add, building off of Dr. Chisholm's comments, I think sometimes there's a big difference between accountability and responsibility. Right. I mean, accountability often suggests, an external form of compliance, which can differ greatly from a more intrinsic sense of, I am responsible for doing this as an educator. Ideally, those things overlap, but not always. And, I think I think any of us, it's human nature. Sometimes we tend to be a little more skeptical and resistant to external forms of compliance and accountability. And we resonate much more with something that's really geared toward building that intrinsic responsibility. I think the answer is probably lies somewhere between the two. That there do need to be some forms of accountability based into our evaluation model, but I think the most important pieces are really going to be the day-to-day work, both in the hiring and how we support people in the kinds of professional dialogue that we engender as a district that really is going to push into the more powerful sense of individual responsibility.
And, I would want us to reach a point where, and just to mention something from Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, he shares a few times that in any given interaction, we as adults go from doing insane racist things to doing insane anti-racist things. Right? Everyone who is listening here tonight has today had racist thoughts and has anti-racist thoughts as well. Right? And so to build that awareness of what's happening, right? For instance, when we as a staff looked at some of the Procter & Gamble videos, like The Look, for instance, we all have given the look, where you look at someone who's color, black or brown, and say, why is that person here? What's that person doing? Right. And so this whole idea of self-vigilance and self-monitoring is something that we work on. And there are times where I have been fortunate to work with staff in my building who have said, oh my God, I did something that I should not have done, and I need to reflect on it, right? I need to be vulnerable. I said something I should not have said. And so the whole idea of evaluating, supervising, and supporting and guiding, it's all part of one larger sort of puzzle of the work that we do with one another and individually.
Okay, just moving on. For Dr. Lucier, Dr. Chisholm, and the school committee members, can you consider having a larger student voice in the hiring process of new teachers as well as administrators? We know that teaching candidates typically give a sample presentation to a couple of classes, which is a good start. But how can we make sure a wider variety of students are exposed to the hiring process of not only teachers, but also positions that don't interact directly with students?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I'm happy to start, and Jamie can pick up. So, when we think about that hiring process, it's probably, most germane to the high school, just given the age of the students of who might participate. And I think it's pretty common for students to be involved in hiring, at the secondary level and for some of the central positions. Even then, sometimes we'll have finalist days where there'll be sessions specifically for a whole group of students to come and listen and give feedback. I think about some of our principalships or assistant principalships or other pieces where we've tended to do that. One of the operational challenges of hiring is sometimes that happens in the summer when kids aren't around, we're not in session, so we can't do all the pieces that we might do while school is in session. Where someone might come in and be in a classroom that's already there. So there are some logistical challenges to doing that, but I think we remain committed, where appropriate, to bring in staff to be part of that process. But Jamie, you can probably speak a little more specifically to the high school.
Yeah, I think all that's true. We tend to hire in a hierarchy fashion, right? So principals get hired before assistant principals, which are before department heads, which are before teachers, and we try to get all that done as early as we possibly can. But sometimes it bleeds into the summer. That would be hard. Every time we hire an administrator at the high school, we have students on the original interview panel. And then we have a student session during the day, and they see a class during the day. So we try to include a lot of student voice. We've started to get better about hiring of teachers. Teacher hiring panels didn't always have students on them. I know, and we can be even better than we've become. Although I do think we've started to include a lot more student voice, not just in the classes and getting feedback from students who are in the class, or watching the students' reaction to a teacher, but also in having students on the interview committee. I know that Mr. Reedy did a lot of that in the social studies department, and Mr. Finneran's done a lot of it too, and Ms. Morris has started to do it in the math department. So we're spreading it, and it needs to be more ubiquitous, and it just needs to always happen with teachers. When we can hire other positions during the school year when we have students around, we can use students to do that, but it is hard in the summer to pull people in, and sometimes that's that's done quickly because we have to, but it's the right consideration. And I also want to say, I appreciate a great deal of support from YES, the Young Ethnic Scholars, on being a part of a lot of those hiring committees. And it can't just be YES. We've got to reach out to more students across the school. But I do appreciate the commitment and the time that a lot of members of YES gave for that process.
Thank you so much for that. This is like a different question to Dr. Chisholm and Dr. Lucier. So it kind of goes off of what you just mentioned, Dr. Chisholm. It's great that some students in Wellesley are able to get involved with these efforts, but it's also important to recognize that this is a huge burden for students also balancing academics, extracurricular activities, and home life. What are you doing to support and shield your students of color who are getting burnt out? Do you have any plans in place to start taking the load off of them, perhaps appointing more faculty members to do this work?
Well, I think one of the things that I talked about earlier was the hope to create these equity literacy for facilitators at the high school, and to train more staff to be able to do this person-to-person stuff. We have a number of faculty groups that do work in this area, and that are certainly, because we're predominantly white staff, so let's talk about race group, or even the group that's worked on curriculum around One Wellesley. So those groups have done a fair amount of work in that area. So in terms of getting more staff to do that, those are a couple of ways that we're trying to get more staff to do that work. And in terms of diversifying, getting more student voice involved, it's reaching out. It's trying to make sure that we're reaching into corners that didn't exist before. I know that as Cynthia Russell's come on to the high school with her office, I know she's a K-12 director for MECO. She has talked to the assistant principals at the high school about wanting to build a leadership council for just the MECO students, to meet with her on a regular basis to get feedback from those students specifically about things going on for them in the program. And then I know that Dr. Curry is also looking at building a council out for the district, which largely would end up being high school kids, I think, as well, to look at how to implement some of the initiatives that she'd like to implement across the district, but with a student voice. So, and we continue to empower YES. I will continue to meet with YES on a regular basis. I meet with them once a cycle, their executive board. And there's a new executive board in place for this year, and we met once earlier this summer to have introductions. So I'll continue to reach out through organizations that are not just the typical student congress, although student congress has been actively trying to diversify themselves as well. I know Arthur Food as the new president, and Aditya Acharya from last year's presidency. That has been a focus for both of them. So those would be some of the ways that I think we're trying to do that.
Yeah, the only thing I would add at a district level to everything Dr. Chisholm mentioned is, one of Dr. Curry's priorities for us that we've talked about as a group of leaders is creating equity coaches at all of our schools. So just as we have specialists within specific content areas to actually train and have specific staff representatives who, in addition to day-to-day work, can also do some coaching for staff in a way that is job embedded and we think far more responsive. For the last 2 years, we've had a district-wide Diversity and Equity Leadership Council, which draws on teachers and administrators from a variety of roles from throughout the district who have come together throughout the year to talk about how things are unfolding, to monitor our work around recruitment and hiring, around professional development, around curriculum, around culture, around parent engagement. And so it's been a great way to have a district-wide sounding board of staff who can come together and not only provide some stewardship of our overall equity agenda, but who can also come and do some problem solving and also find some affinity within that group as well. So I think that's been a really important voice for us in Venue. At the end of the day, I don't think we want anyone, whether it's student or staff, to feel like they bear the burden of this alone. And while we certainly want to provide outlets for both students and staff of color to engage in these issues and to feel empowered and to use their voice, that's not an expectation that we want them to address all of our challenges and take a leading role. And so it really does have to be this, this combination of opportunities and just ongoing dialogue. I think one of the reasons we wanted to create a senior level position for the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion is, and I don't know who it was that said it earlier, we have all these individual things happening at multiple layers within schools, within departments, different aspects of the organization. And yet it didn't feel like we were necessarily pulling everything together as cohesively to work in concert, even though lots of things were happening. And so our hope was by creating this office, while that responsibility would still lie with everyone, that it would allow us to bring even more clarity and focus and synergy between all of these individual efforts in a way that would hopefully feel more cohesive and be more impactful.
Okay. For all principals, including elementary, and middle school, what is the protocol for holding teachers and students accountable for saying racist things and perpetuating microaggressions? Wellesley has so many resources, and it would be great to see a set of consequences implemented to hold members of our community accountable, not only for the major visible incidents, but also for the daily occurrences. And also, if school committee can answer this as well, if they have any opinions.
I think at the middle school for us, it's about, obviously following the protocols that we have in place to be able to understand, situations, to be able to, call people in and have conversations about what happened and, making sure that we are appropriately disciplining as a result of that. We do think of all of these as learning experiences for our students. So, we do take that into account with any consequence that we give, for discipline. One thing that I wanted to bring up that I think would help is that, Jamie and I today had a conversation with Dr. Curry about a 24/7 respect program that we're looking to implement. It's based on a Boston Public Schools program, and it's about, how do we, talk about sort of, incidences that happened or microaggressions or things that happen in school, sometimes on social media, sometimes, within the walls of the school, but things that often maybe don't get reported that we want to bring more attention to so that students will feel comfortable reporting them. And so I do think part of it is about, not just about the consequences, but about us, being able to be involved in understanding what's happening and then be involved in the conversation that results from that.
I'd say this, as a school committee person, we tend to get phone calls or we get emails, texts from parents, from a variety of perspectives. And I think it's, again, important for us to model good behavior and and at the same time not try to overstep our bounds and try to solve problems or overthink what the administration's doing. And it's, you know, in many instances, it's the school committee's job to focus parents on asking them to speak to either the teachers or the administrators or the superintendent, you know, sort of following chains of command in the system, so that questions don't get blown out of proportion or fester or get miscommunicated. It's our job to sort of, like, again, model proper behavior so that people deal with these issues as they come up in a, I hate to use this word, adult manner.
You know, schools often get perceived as the land of nice, where you know, something happens and we're just trying to make people feel good about the, you know, a particular situation. But we're willing to have the difficult conversations. We have had difficult conversations, and if we're not calling it, if we're not naming it, we're not doing our jobs. And so our commitment, when we see it, and that's for, you know, for us holding ourselves accountable as well, right? We have to be able to engage in these discussions. And yeah, I'm not going to give you examples. I don't want to violate someone feeling like, oh, you know, you threw me out there. But I've had many difficult conversations this year about a thing that was said to a child, a thing that was said to a parent, a comment that was made about an individual, and it's taking it on, having a discussion, naming it, and being committed to ensuring that those things don't happen again.
Okay, so for Dr. Lucier, Mr. Ito, anyone else who wants to answer as well, after the results of the 2016 presidential election, because it is such a divisive election, many students felt significant tension in their classroom environments. The outcome of this 2020 election, regardless of who wins, is likely to be even more controversial. Do you have a plan in place to make sure that the outcome of the election does not divide the school community?
That's a tough question. So, you know, I think there's no question that the political environment today is so incredibly polarized, you know, as our conversations around race and the degree to which those have been weaponized around this election season, which is really frustrating. So, you know, I think the balance we're always trying to strike is that, you know, on the one hand, schools are a great place for these debates and conversations for kids to challenge each other. And, you know, something where I know I have felt personally challenged is, you know, our role is not to be partisan. And yet, if we're a district that's going to stand for a set of core values, which we talk about a lot, I don't view our unapologetic support of those as being inappropriately political, right? Not every viewpoint is worthy of our support. And that's a difficult thing to say, right? Because we want to make sure that there's, you know, we're not pushing a particular political agenda, and yet we do have a set of stakes in the ground here, our core values that we try to live by every day. And it's difficult when a political leader is speaking out in absolute opposition to the very things we stand for. And you know, I must admit, it's a tricky balance sometimes to both recognize that and operationalize it in how we talk to parents and students. And so I don't have an easy answer for that, Yasmin, other than, you know, wanting to lean into a little bit of that discomfort in our classroom. I'd rather have some of those conversations out in the open, for kids to challenge each other and for our staff to serve as a broker of those conversations. I actually think that's a really healthy thing, and that's, you know, one of the important roles that and venues we can provide as staff. So, you know, I don't think the answer is trying to avoid conversations about that. And nor do I think there should be an expectation that there are always going to be comfortable conversations about that. I do think safety doesn't always mean everyone's comfortable. Sometimes I think we equate those two things with each other, and they're actually a little bit different, or even a lot different. So regardless of the kind of opening we may have, whether it's remote or hybrid or somewhere in between, I do think these are conversations that are going to be happening in classrooms between and among teachers and students. And, I think the more that we try to engage those and have people crosswalk their feelings with our district's core values, I actually think it's a really positive thing.
Yeah, and I think the important part is being proactive with our staffs before, so that we're having conversations as adults, so we can better then have conversations with our students. And I do think we benefit from the experience of 2016 and being able to be involved in what happened as a result of that election. And I think there was one thing we learned is that it was very personal and emotional for a lot of people, and that's something we're going to have to be prepared to react to. And I'll go back to what Dr. Lucier was saying about our core values in terms of being a caring and cooperative community. I do think that no matter what side you're on, that we have to remember to act with some level of grace and empathy in terms of the outcome. And the only way to, I think, really think about moving forward and making progress is to start there. And so it's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough time for many people, and I think we just have to be, again, plan ahead for that.
Yeah, just coming in from personal experience, like I personally witnessed a student record a teacher of color, a Black woman specifically, in 2016, the day right after the Trump election, and record her without her knowledge and put it on social media without her knowledge as well. And that situation wasn't handled in the way that I thought that situation should have been handled. But anyway, I just want to emphasize that students and teachers of color, specifically Black, will be at a vulnerable position, especially if a certain political candidate gets elected.
Thanks, Yasmin. So here's another question for Dr. Chisholm and Dr. Lucier. There have been many stories shared on the ABC CSP Stories Instagram page. It's kind of like the Black at Wellesley. I don't know if you guys have followed that, but for ABC. And they've been advocating for their member schools to diversify their curriculum and make sure their voices are heard. With this in mind, how can we build a better relationship between ABC leadership and students and the WHS administration? How can we include ABC's students and leadership who have unique and important perspectives to contribute to the conversation in all aspects of the school's processes, including curriculum changes, hiring, and activities?
I'm happy to talk to that. ABC's certainly been a program near and dear to my heart for the whole 22 years I've been in Wellesley. And it's always been a challenge to work with the leadership. There's a lot of turnover in the leadership at ABC, and so it's a program that is structurally different than the school and is structurally separate from the school. And while we've had a good working relationship and we value all of our ABC girls that we've had, they've always been girls at Wellesley High, who've come to Wellesley High, and we know that some of the challenges inherent in that program make things difficult for the girls universally. And some of the challenges are ours that we can work on, and some of the challenges of the ABC structure themselves. So I've been involved in some really direct, challenging conversations with ABC leadership, and I've had some great conversations with ABC leadership. But I think it has to be very deliberate, especially given that the number of students is so small in the program. So I think we have to stay very deliberate about the inclusion and know our girls and make sure we know what they're going through, and make sure they're hearing their voices, and make sure that if there's a place that ABC leadership needs to be speaking out to us, that they know that our door is open to do that. And then if there's places where we need to be speaking to ABC leadership, that we need to take the bold steps to do that too. And so, I feel like that's work that has been ongoing, and I don't, I want to be respectful that that's a unique program that is not part of the Wellesley Public Schools, but we're partners. I want to respect where they have control over their organization. And I want, where there's obvious intersectionality between the two, that we have really open and honest dialogue about how that's going, and make sure there's space for the girls' voices in those conversations. I think that is key. And it's really hard for a 14-year-old girl who moves here from somewhere else and is just getting used to so much new, to be able to lift their own voice up right away. And I know that that's what we're trying to build, in strong voices of young women. And sometimes there needs to be some scaffolding along the way. And again, that has to be done really deliberately. So I have a lot of thoughts about that, but I'll sum up there for the moment.
Yeah, I don't know that I can add much more than what Dr. Chisholm outlined. I think we've always had a very good relationship with whoever the leaders of ABC have been. I know, for the last few years, a lot of those conversations have been around just the future of the program, and helping understand what the transition from Wellesley College was going to look like. And I know Dr. Chisholm and I both supported some of the work to make that transition. And we're so pleased that there's a new house. But yeah, like any other program, I would say that the key is just maintaining those lines of communication. It's such a specific program, at the high school for a small number of folks, of our students. And so if there are ways that we can support that entry of those students and their growth, we certainly want to do that. And I think the best thing we can do is to maintain those lines of communication, both with the students themselves, their academic advisors, through ABC, and the leadership of the program.
Okay. I think this might be our final question coming from us. So for Dr. Lucier and Dr. Chisholm, why do we need police officers in the school, such as the officers who are often seen in the high school cafeteria each day? What are their jobs, and would it be possible to replace them with people who have more specifically applicable qualifications? It is important to recognize that while some students feel safer because of these officers, there's also a large number of students who feel unsafe in their school environment due to their presence.
Yeah, I appreciate that question, and no surprise, it's one we've gotten a lot over the last 3 or 4 months, and understandably so. Wellesley's School Resource Officer program, which has been in existence for some years, is very different from, I think, how SRO programs are structured in many other places. And I think fundamentally, this is not a program around law enforcement. This is very much a program to try to build relationships and think about another layer of student support. I can completely understand, some of the suspicion and perceptions of the police based on things that have happened here and elsewhere. And yet, I think our sense is that creating a further separation is not a way to address that. Our hope is that by building positive relationships that begin at the elementary school, that extend not just to students but to their families, is something that when students do enter into a crisis of some kind, I can point to so many examples where the police, again, not from a law enforcement perspective, but just from a support perspective, have been able to step in and augment the kinds of support that is being provided, whether it's by our principals, guidance counselors, or any of the other folks. We really see them as a member of our team and support staff. So, I think the police are aware of that perception, and I think we want to continue to think about ways we can structure that involvement to remain positive for everyone involved.
And if I could add to what you just said, if I'm correct, Dr. Lucier, the school department is involved in the hiring of the SROs for our community, with the belief that we're trying to find the right match between a police officer and someone who understands how to work with children, who understands how to work with different developmental stages. And I think that's unique to our town.
I think that's right, Gerardo. I think the first priority is finding someone who has those skills to work with young people around a range of issues. So up until just over a year ago, we had a single SRO. So many of you went to school knowing Officer Rosenberg, who spent so much time when he was on the clock and off the clock coming to student events, coaching girls powder puff at the high school, attending so many things to try to build and maintain relationships with students outside of a context of any sort of law enforcement, really just wanting to create positive connections with kids. And I know Officer Poirier, who has joined us, and is someone we've worked with in the past, has really followed that model. And it's actually been great to have both male and female representation, because there are times when, having that specific gender support, I know has been really critical for us. So, but I also know the police are interested in, additional things we can do to help structure that program in a way that, deconstructs some of those perceived barriers that kids and others may have with that work.
So there are some specific questions, and I'm looking on the YouTube and also on the Q&A, and also the panelists, you guys can answer specific Q&A questions, like type it out. But a Q&A person said, what type of training is given to these officers? Are they armed, and are they able to arrest students?
I think it's a little bit of probably each of those questions. Some of their training is in diversion techniques, right? So community policing, restorative justice, de-escalation. So that kind of training is specific to an SRO. So Officer Wall, who is our SRO right now, is obviously a new SRO. He's taken over in the middle of this year. So he's newly hired and is still going through some of the training that Officer Rosenberg already had. And Officer Rosenberg was continually going to training on some of these things. I don't know all the extent to all their training. I know they have some of the other training that police officers on patrol have as well. Are they armed? They are armed. And I just want to name that I understand that is a post in the ground that can make people feel unsafe, that there is someone walking around with a gun in the building, and I understand that, and particularly somebody wearing a uniform, because we've had conversations about, do they have to be armed? Do they have to be wearing a uniform? And that's been police department policy that they do that, and that's where that has stood. Are they able to arrest students? They're police officers, so they're able to arrest anybody, so they are able to arrest students. I have never ever had a student arrested in the building. We have worked really hard to make sure that if there was ever going to be a student arrest, and I've always had agreement with SROs or any other officers in incidents that I was involved with, either as an assistant principal when I was more involved directly with discipline, or as a principal, where we partnered with them to make sure that any arrests like that took place outside the building, and not right in front of everybody. But they do have the ability to arrest people. They are police officers, and they can arrest anybody.
Sorry, someone wanted me to mention real quick. Someone wanted me to mention that wasn't there a threat with a taser, where the officer brought out a taser or something, if I remember correctly? They just want that question answered. if anyone knows.
Yeah, I guess that, sorry, more like my question was, are you aware of like the microaggressions and like racial trauma that SROs have perpetrated to students of color? And like, what are you doing about it? What have you done about it in the past, especially with that incident where a taser was pulled on like I think it was just like a disagreement in the cafeteria and a taser was pulled on students.
Yeah, I don't know the details of that. I've heard that rumor, but I don't know the details of the taser incident specifically. So I don't want to speak out of turn and say that I know that all the details of that I don't. But I am aware that student resource officers have made kids feel uncomfortable and have committed microaggressions. And so I do know that you know, I've been involved with conversations that and witnessed Dr. Lucier having conversations with Chief Pilecki about you know, wanting to make sure that we're, you know, on top of this program and that it's being run the way that it should be run. And I know that as long as there's a police officer in the building, some people are going to feel uncomfortable, and I understand that. I don't, you know, it doesn't feel completely comfortable. I'm just being honest, but you know, we definitely believe that you know, that our goal is to, you know, through proximity to have people together and that, you know, to deepen understanding and so that the relationships improve between the police department and police officers and the kids. And then in the long run, that would be the best thing. So that's been the philosophy we've been operating under, like Dr. Lucier described earlier.
I think there's one last question about the SROs, and it's how do they know that the Wellesley SROs are different than others throughout Massachusetts and the country for that fact when no one has asked how they are trained? And then also another follow-up to that was a person stated that they would be more comfortable with an SRO that's a POC. So then my follow-up question to that would be, can we be involved in or can students be involved in the hiring process with the SROs in particular?
You know, I can try to take at least part of those questions. Some of how we know that, you know, our program is unique is many of us have worked in other districts, both here and in other states, and even in Massachusetts, you can go to some places today and see an SRO stationed at a security booth when you check into a school. There are other schools where they're clearly geared toward being a security guard for the school. And I know there are conversations in Wellesley. You know, there have been any number of school shootings over the last several years, and you know, parents were really anxious about that. And so there were conversations about, should we have SROs at every single one of our schools? And I think that definitely came from a place of, you know, we're afraid and we think we need added school security. And we really had to educate folks that while they can certainly respond in a crisis, their primary job is not to provide school security. Their primary job is really building and maintaining connections, actually teaching pieces of our curriculum around risk behavior in education that's happening at multiple levels, elementary, middle school, and high school. So, and some of those pieces may exist elsewhere, but I also know that our memorandum of agreement that really spells out very clearly the relationship we have with the Wellesley Police Department, even outside of the SROs, has been used as a model from the district attorney's office in promoting that sort of collaboration in a productive way with other communities as well. I know I've actually spoken about it at some conferences with the Wellesley Police Department. So again, I think it's a program. We never want to say there's nothing to learn. And I think if there are microaggressions, we want to learn from those the same way we would learn from those for any of our staff, and to think about additional collaborative training so that we can be responsive to that. But you know, I'm not sure that the answer to this is to create, you know, even more distance away from that. I'd rather look at ways we can continue to improve the program.
David, can I add a little bit more to that? working in other districts, there's definitely a difference between what I've witnessed other places and what I've seen. I think I'm working at the end of my 8th year. And Officer Poirier has come in, and I can only speak to the elementary level and my experience at Upham and seeing in other schools as well, Gerardo's, and he can let you know how it works there as well. But how this goes beyond, there's obviously the teaching of risk behavior, but this goes beyond. I'll give you a few examples beyond just the police officer. She comes in, she will help with dismissal, she'll help with arrival, she'll help getting kids out of the car, meets and greets every student. If we have a couple of our assemblies, she's been involved in those. She's a face of a police officer, but also a friend to 5 to 11-year-olds. And I think that's critical in the backdrop of what we're witnessing today. Also, there's pieces that happened and have happened where they are a resource in the community to help families, and they have helped families. I can speak to Upham specifically, have helped families that are in crisis. And so that now we have not just a police officer dealing with things against the law, but also helping in a social dynamic of helping families that are having some very critical needs that we're trying to meet. And so they've been a valuable resource, invaluable resource in those areas. So those are some of the differences that I've seen as compared to other places where they're just police officers. And as David or Dr. Lucier had said, they're waiting at the door to check people as they come in. So my experience with it is that it's been more of a wraparound service than it has been just a police officer.
And our town and district social workers have worked very closely with the SROs in offering additional support to our families. At the same time, I want to, at least from my perspective, acknowledge and value the questions that are coming in. And it just makes me a bit more reflective about additional ways that we can imagine this collaboration. I've never invited the SRO, for instance, to our faculty meetings that don't have anything to do with school security, for instance. And I'm thinking about ways to invite them into the work that we're doing around race, right? So I really appreciate the ways that we're being forced to reconsider and rethink and improve the work that we're doing moving forward.
I just want to kind of point out that I do understand that the SROs do have many jobs and that they function in like a good way for plenty of people. But I was asking about the issues of, racial trauma and microaggressions, and it's a little hard for me to hear when you point out all the good things when I'm asking about like this issue. It feels like you're kind of ignoring the actual issue that they are perpetrating these things, that they are causing racial trauma. That's all. I'm not mad or anything. It's just that, like Zoe said, she knows a lot of people that are not comfortable with the current SRO, and like we're kind of asking like, how do you guys intend to fix this?
Well, I think we need to start by unpacking that a little bit and wanting to do that in collaboration with the SRO and the police to figure out if we need a better feedback loop to know, what that looks like in practice. I mean, to me, that's a good first step.
And some of that feedback has come back, and we have funneled that back to the police department, just so that they understand the sensitivity and how Officer Wall can improve, and where are places where he's being perceived this way, so that he can get better and not do that. They did get a healthy dose of feedback this summer. I know on the previous panel I was on, there was some questions specifically for the police chief, and specifically around the SRO, and I know that there were conversations that took place at Wellesley Police Department following up around that. And I was involved in some email chains for some follow-up with some of my faculty members and members of the Wellesley Police Department around the SRO specifically. So I know that they've got some feedback that they haven't had before. So this has been helpful.
Oh, and I don't know if I think I may have missed it potentially, but can students be involved in the hiring process of the SRO in the future? Is that like a good suggestion or something like that?
Yeah, we can certainly pass that on to, I'm not opposed to that at all, to the police department. I mean, it's a partnership, but, this is definitely a police hiring process. So, we want to make sure we're doing that in a way that they're comfortable, but that seems like a great suggestion to me.
And then moving on from the SRO topic, an audience member said, would like to hear their thoughts around the pods that are forming because of the hybrid online plans and how they feel about the achievement gaps that those will be exacerbating, how to mitigate the impacts. And that's from Betsy Kamyati.
That's an interesting question, and then I appreciate Betsy asking that question. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how successful the pods will be in their work. I don't know exactly what the plans are for anybody's particular pod. I was having a conversation with a parent. I think it was the end of last week around this, specifically around this pods and decisions that some parents are making to send their kids to private school and try to gain these gaps. It allows us in the school, I will say, if there are families who are choosing to pull some of their students out of the school, then we can continue to focus our most important attention on the kids who need it the most. It's not going to impact our resolve to do the best job that we can in the building, because those students aren't with us. It's not going to, and if it allows us to have more time and resources to give to our neediest students, then that's exactly what we'll do. But we're going to continue to prioritize the needs of our neediest kids.
I'd love to weigh in on the pods as well. I would say that while I appreciate the urgency that all families are feeling right now to want to support their children and to ensure that their children have what they need to thrive this upcoming school year, I think it's important that we all are committed to our community together. And the state has made clear that if we're going to be at home learning, that we are engaged with our WPS educators and that we are connecting with them live. And there are clear guidance, there's clear guidance on what it means to be sort of meeting our time on learning. And so I think we're going to have to keep all of this measured in terms of our responses for how we go about setting up learning communities at home, knowing that there will be expectations of engagement for our WPS classes, even during those days when students are at home. And if we're in a full remote, again, there will be daily online live expectations for students to be attending to classes. It's a different feel of what remote learning felt like in this past spring. This attendance expectation, grades are part of this expectation, assignments that are linked to standards. So there's a sense of urgency from the state that we are supporting all of our students in our remote learning efforts. So I would just, really want to send out a level of assurance that what we develop from the WPS side around whether it's in a hybrid or a full remote, the intentional place for remote learning has been a key part of our planning as we're thinking about this upcoming fall.
And Dr. Dabrowski, I know we had talked about how in the hybrid model, we are prioritizing our neediest kids so that they are attending school, not 2 live days, which is the essentially the model, but 4 days. And so that's critical. Today I was working on what that schedule would look like and how many kids would be in classes to ensure that our students are getting what they need.
Yeah, I would echo that too, and I would say at at the 10,000-foot level, there's so much evidence of how the coronavirus has had a disparate impact for families that don't have choices to go back to work, that have to or don't have access to quality health care or testing. And I want to make sure that in whatever those choices are that have to be made in the coming days, that we keep that equity lens around whatever disparate impact might be created, because we can't see through some of the privilege that some of us may have that others may not have access to.
And we can add on top of that, and Dr. Dabrowski can speak more to this, the number of kids that qualified and accepted summer school learning and enrichment. And I know that that was a sizable group, and that it's been going quite well.
No, thank you for saying that, Gerardo. Yes, so the remote learning summer support school that we ran this summer for the first time serviced over 100 plus students. We're surveying families now to hear how those experiences went, all remote. And again, I think we've learned so much about how to engage in a remote setting, and we're looking to do it better. We're mindful of small group instruction. We're mindful of the pedagogy we use, the materials we use. And so we remain very, very committed to, as Dr. Lucier said, looking at this through the lens of equity and being mindful of the privileges that some of us may have and the responsibility that all of us have as educators in Wellesley.
Okay, then I think this may be our last question because of timing, but it says, will school committee ask for more funding for PD and equity and anti-racism education? And will there be additional funding for CNI for teachers this upcoming school year to continue working on curriculum that focuses on anti-racism curriculum / resources, etc.?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in here. So I work very closely with Dr. Curry and am thrilled that she's got wonderful resources this upcoming school year, both from a WEF grant and from a grant from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Additionally, we're working closely on what we call our title grants. So we're given federal dollars each year and are prioritizing a level of our funding for a lot of the work Dr. Curry is putting forward in her DE&I. So I can say enthusiastically, yes, we are prioritizing this work through a CNI lens, but also through professional development, and also through the work of equity facilitators that Dr. Dr. Curry is looking to grow in her, this next year working with teachers. So we're fortunate in Wellesley to have multiple places where we're looking to prioritize this work. And as much as we're focused on a safe reopening, we're coupling that with our really digging into our work around anti-racism, our work around equity, inclusion, and what that means for all the different stakeholders.
In answer to the first question about requesting more funding and PD for around equity and anti-racism, in general, the school committee, of course, looks to the administration and partners with the administration in terms of having them develop the budget that they require. And we, of course, share in the core values as well as really the strategic priorities of the district. So certainly we're going to look to the team really to come up with the recommendations in terms of, or the requests really for the professional development and the topic areas that they want to focus on, and absolutely we'll do what we can to advocate for that budget, and making sure that it's, of course, stays in line as much as possible with the guidance we're getting from town hall, and help to really move budgets forward. So I think for the purpose of this year, I think the budget process actually went quite smoothly, and it seems like we certainly got really all the key priorities that were requested.
Okay, So thank you for answering that question. And thank you to our speakers for their generosity with their time. Your insight as members of administration is highly valued by us in our community. And thank you to our audience for their continued support throughout the series. We are sincerely grateful for each and every one of you. You're on mute, Julia.
Sorry. A giant thank you to World of Wellesley for all of their support in this series. We could not have done all of this without them. Thank you in particular to Nova Bureau and Michelle Chalmers for their direct support. We're asking our audience members to please check out the Instagram accounts Black at Wellesley and ABC CSP Stories and Young Ethnic Scholars. The administrators, you should be following those too. Thank you to these accounts for the work they are doing to create a platform for BIPOC in our communities.
And thank you to all our contributors, especially Lexi Casasis, Alex Stoddard, Sierra Sinclair, Zoe Bellamy Gomez. We appreciate all the work you have done behind the scenes to make these live streams the best that they could possibly be. The changes that we have made in our school and district community would not have happened if it wasn't for all of you. I know I greatly appreciate all of you, and everyone should recognize you and all your efforts.
Finally, thank you to Kayla Reed and Liliana Sidorenko for creating this platform and all the work you've put into it. A huge thank you to Liliana for all the work she has done and is doing in and around this organization. She has worked endlessly, and even today, as she's hiking mountains with her family, she is helping and leading whenever she has service.
And on top of that, before I get you guys going, I was wondering if all of the panelists would be interested in us sending you guys questions so that when we're done, for the rest of the questions that we didn't get to today, we were wondering if we can send you those questions and if you would be willing to respond to those questions so that we can send it out to the broader community.
Absolutely.
Okay. And I'm gonna take that as a yes from everyone else potentially. And if you guys, and from the audience, if you would like to send an email to wakeupwellesley or youngethnicscholars@gmail.com so that we can email those responses back to you so you guys can see what the rest of the questions are and how everyone else responds to that, that would be great. And for closing, another special thank you to all of the teachers and faculty that contributed to our efforts and have been in this live stream since day one. Love y'all and have a great night.